I'm going to introduce Nicolette Larder a little later, who's helping with the food sub-project, but her kind of labour is involved in that in particular. She can't be here tonight though.
So before we go on, I'm sure you've already acknowledged country, but we weren't there at the beginning. Just wanted to acknowledge that we're meeting in different places on Zoom, but on Aboriginal land, and that sovereignty wasn't ceded, and just acknowledging all the custodians of this land. So the Armidale Climate and Health Project came about, so about a year ago we wrote a grant.
A year and a half. COVID slowed time down.
Yeah. So we wrote a grant to Adapt New South Wales, and we were lucky to get a grant to run a series of workshops and a community festival looking at linking together climate change, health and Indigenous knowledge. So we really wanted to ask the question of how can we build community connections and resilience in the face of climate change, improve our health and put Indigenous knowledge at the centre. So we started this project just really with this question, and we didn't have a series of bright ideas or solutions or anything, because this issue is so much bigger than just a couple of people's ideas, and it's so complex, and it sort of will take a whole community to work together to start to address these things. But our whole process has been, I guess, taking this question to a bunch of different community members and getting their ideas on what would actually be helpful for the community. So it was very much like a consultative process. And I guess my background for being involved with this is I work as a GP, and I've also done a lot of climate advocacy and activism over the years with Doctors for the Environment Australia. And I guess, like, from a health point of view, climate change is really a core health issue, and that's not at all sort of debated, or it's quite mainstream these days. So the Australian Medical Association, British Medical Association, Royal College of General Practitioners, all the main medical bodies in Australia and internationally have declared climate change a massive public health threat, and most have declared climate change a health emergency. So it's very much sort of like it, as far as words go anyway, everyone's saying the right thing and saying that it's really important. Actions are maybe lagging a little bit behind. But it's, I guess climate change is known to affect health in a number of different ways, like directly through the effects of heat or drought, water shortage, increased respiratory illnesses, cardiac illnesses from air pollution, with bushfires or with fossil fuel generation. There's mental health effects of living through drought and sort of changing land. So there's many, many health effects of climate change. So I guess that's kind of been my entry into this. But so it's all very well to talk about this, but to really try and address it in a practical way is, I think, a little bit harder, and on a local level as well. It's hard to sort of get these really big picture issues into something that's more local and practical. So I guess that's kind of where we're trying to aim with this project, is trying to bring it back to the local level as much as we can. And this artwork is by Tyler Stackman. So he did this artwork as part of the project and kind of represents the interconnection between people and country and water.
I have what he said here about it. He says, I've used warm colours to represent the heat of summer, as well as fire stick farming or burning off, which is an essential part of maintaining Australia's landscape. The blue is rivers and waterways, which if dried up would be bad for our ecosystems. In the centre there is an echidna to represent the Armidale area. Boomerangs on the side of the piece are to symbolise that knowledge of climate, the knowledge of climate and how to look after it. And I've also added wattle leaves and flowers in because our flora is essential for all life.
Cool. And coincidentally, or I guess this issue is so important. The NAIDOC theme this week, it's NAIDOC week this week, and the theme is Heal Country. And Heal Country seeks reflection from all Australians to ask themselves what they treasure about being from and living on this land. If, like us, you find peace, pride and enjoyment from our natural values, our beaches, mountains, rivers, wetlands, forests, deserts and more, then perhaps it's time to get off the bench and become an advocate for change. And all you guys being part of SLA and many other things are already doing this, but I think it's a good incentive and to bring it back. So the people who are involved in the Climate and Health Project, there's many more people who we've collaborated with along the way. But myself and Jen are the facilitators, and we do all this voluntarily. We have hired Shannon Smith, who is a Aboriginal woman who's a dancer, as well as project coordinator. So she's helping us with various aspects of the project. And Uncle Steve Witters has been really instrumental and part of the consultations from the beginning and giving us guidance as well. He's a local Anawan elder, which I'm sure you all know as well. So just as a bit of a rundown for those of you who might not have been involved from the beginning. So we had a freezing cold launch on 26th of September 2020 with COVID restrictions, which was really nice just to have music and kind of start talking about the project as well. Do you want to say anything more about the launch?
Well, we had also, I mean, there's a rundown on our website and we'll give you the links at the end, and maybe you've come across them in your travels, but we had support from NIRAM and the Winter Blooming Festival for the launch, as well as a little bit of support from UNE. And Uncle Steve gave a welcome to country, and we had a whole range of local musicians play. And Callum Clayton Dixon read from Surviving New England, and in particular, and this I guess will come to a point we're making later, around the relationship between kind of agriculture and colonization. And so it really sort of got us thinking about how to, especially when we're kind of thinking about kind of changing food growing practices, how to address that colonial violence that kind of is in the agricultural system up here. And that, so that was kind of a nice, not nice in that sense of reminding us of terrible violence, but good reminder at the very beginning to always kind of keep these things together. Because I think one of the things that I suppose I wanted to say in relation to the first slide where Sujata was sharing our questions of bringing climate change, health and Indigenous knowledge together, it's like, some of the actions are really very familiar, and some of the things we'll talk about later, you'll be like, oh, we're already kind of doing that. But it's like making sure that you kind of keep these concerns in your view is not always straightforward. And so, hopefully that comes across, like how we've kind of tried to keep these things together in every action.
Yeah, and I also should have said at the beginning as well, so when we wrote the application for the grant, we also had partnership with SLA and Armajun, the Aboriginal Health Service where I work, and UNE. So there was kind of 3 partners in order to get this grant as well. So thanks SLA. So after we had we had the official kind of launch in September 2020, and after that was really the start of just a whole lot of community conversations. So taking that question about how do we so the grant is to run a series of workshops, but we didn't have an idea of what those workshops should be. So we went to people like Lyndon Strong, the Aboriginal drug and alcohol worker at Armajun, to Tanya, to Callum, to Uncle Steve, Helen, Annette, like a lot of, I mean, we weren't able to talk to everybody who is relevant in this, and apologies if we missed really important people, but I guess we just tried to ask this question of as many people as we could, and especially from the Aboriginal community as well, of how can we start addressing all these issues on a local level. So, and the questions, the answers that came up, especially from the Aboriginal community, was very much about connecting back to country, healing from all the sort of violence, like colonisation violence, but also sort of the ongoing effects like drug and alcohol use, mental health, the trauma of people dying so young, so all the health effects. So that was a really big thing. And also, yeah, I guess the healing coming from working on the land and like healthy food, all that kind of thing that directly benefits people's health and benefits the environment at the same time. So they were the kind of themes that came up a lot of the time. Did you want to say more on that?
Not only then, I guess by May, we were ready to share a rough plan with everyone for what was coming next. And so we held this open day, and I know some of you who are here tonight probably were there. We had this open day and creek walk to sort of begin sharing that. And also the creek walk was one of the workshops, because one of the things that obviously kept coming up is healthy waterways, healthy people. And so we did a walk along Black Gully, and Helen spoke, and Sarah Schmuder spoke, and Uncle Steve spoke. And then we also went over to the community garden and Joe spoke to sort of share that thinking and connect everything up for people. So connecting sort of the bushry gem that Landcare has done. Uncle Steve spoke about Indigenous, like the importance of water in Indigenous notions of country, and also, you know, ideas of water sovereignty. Like we sometimes think about land rights and forget about the water, but obviously the two things are totally related, as we learned in the drought, all too painfully. And then the community garden's proximity to this waterway just felt important to bring people to, remind them it was there, and hopefully get, you know, a few people who hadn't been there through the site as this really important kind of side of sustainability action in Armidale. Because it is like, for the amount of people that know it and love it, there's always people who are like, oh, I didn't know that was there. So yeah, I think that day would have kind of, you brought some new people to that place as well.
Cool. And a more recent workshop that has happened was on the 20th of June. And that was on unearthing Armidale's diverse food economies, which Jen will talk much more about afterwards. But that was more like I guess like a focus group of people who are already very active in local food, and to come together and think about questions and think about the future. So we'll talk more about that later. So things that are planned in the pipeline for the rest of the year. So on July 22nd, I'm helping put together a workshop that's also supported by the New England Division of General Practice and the Primary Health Network on climate change, health and practical sustainability for health professionals, which is on a Thursday evening. So if you know any local GPs or nurses or health workers that want to come, send them to our website and link them in. The other workshops that are coming up, which are, they're sort of like workshops / whole projects, which are not like, they're not just generated by us, they're already happening in the community. So there's going to be a access to country workshop, which is really looking at how to increase Indigenous access to private property. And there is already some models of this happening in the local area where people have opened up their property for kind of traditional uses, or even just for Aboriginal people to go and go to country and just hang out there, or go fishing, or just spend time on country. And Callum Clayton Dixon's really driving this this part of it, and it's also, I guess, linked into a bigger project of a push by local Aboriginal people to kind of buy a big property, so they have a lot more access to country and can take people out there for men's groups and women's groups and kids camps and things like that. So that's kind of like, I guess, kickstarting that. It's almost like a land co-op that is that's been talked about for years, but I guess this is kind of like getting a bit of momentum behind it.
Yeah, I think all like this project, the Healing on Country project and the Diverse Food Economy project have all gained momentum through our conversations and consultations. And I guess you'll speak about the Healing on Country in a minute, but it's what we're trying to do with this project, and I guess why like the pace of it's been different to other things that I've done of this order, is we're trying to gather enough momentum so the projects continue beyond the life of our grant. So we're, really trying to put the pieces together carefully in the hope that, once this grant ends, that there'll be something ongoing to show for it, which is kind of what we promised in the proposal. And I feel like we're sort of, particularly with the Access to Country and the Food Economy project, on the way to doing that.
Yeah. And so the Healing on Country, that's that's something that will be in conjunction with the women's and men's groups that's already happening at Armajun. And I've been talking to sort of facilitators who can run some kind of healing workshop or trauma recovery workshop for people who attend these groups. And the men's group in particular, they're really interested in kind of, they meet at the cultural centre, and they're interested in sort of regenerating the bush tucker walk, and also looking at regenerating that bit of creekland behind the cultural centre, so where there's a little lagoon or billabong thing. And yeah, the men are really keen to kind of be part of that. And I think there's also a much bigger group of people who are looking at sort of transforming that whole Black Gully area, which we sort of went to a meeting, but we need to link back in with those people, but probably some of you guys know about that as well.
We can skip the Diverse Food Economy one because we're coming to that.
The Climate and Health Medical Student Challenge, that's going on with the uni, and that's basically encouraging medical students to think about linking climate and health, and they submit their brilliant ideas for the future in the form of a presentation, and then we decide which one's the most exciting and then give them a little bit of a prize. So it's kind of just an incentive for medical students to think about these issues as well. And then do you want to talk about?
Yeah, we were going to do our own festival, but then I suppose a number of things. Like, one is it's a lot of work to put on a festival, as certainly Annette would know from the amazing Earth Day festival. That's something we left out. We did have our the stall at Earth Day to promote things, but because of working with Uncle Steve and Shannon volunteers at the Aboriginal Cultural Centre and Keeping Place, and because of the community garden, the centre of gravity of the project in Armidale has sort of become this area, and so it just seemed like an absolute no-brainer to partner with Black Gully, and we're super happy that Sarah, Mark and Dave are keen to have us as part of it. And we're going to have a talks tent which will showcase the work we've done, showcase the next steps that happen at the end of the year, and also culminate the project. And I think why I think this partnership is so great for this project in particular is the health piece that isn't always present at Black Gully. I mean, it's always, if you address climate change, you're kind of going to address the health dimensions of it as well, which, and Black Gully is a sustainability festival, but just kind of bringing in awareness to that point for people, thinking specifically about Indigenous health, Indigenous knowledge, and I guess giving people that vocabulary to speak about it in that register, rather than always kind of talking about it as this big sort of systemic global problem. Like, the health question really does bring it home to the body, to our local kind of experiences, to our families in a really tangible way. And it's, we're always talking about, giving people new ways to spread the word, I guess, about how to respond to climate change. So yeah, hopefully the talks tent will do that work. And we can all dance like these happy people as well. Hopefully COVID will allow us to do it.
Well, maybe we'll all be vaccinated by then. All right, so this is
Oh, yes. So unearthing Armidale's diverse food economy is the name we gave to, I guess, the food sub-project of the Armidale Climate and Health Project. And I suppose the reason why, like, food is kind of perhaps self-evidently almost like a silver bullet for the climate change question and the health question. And changing the local food economy, changing people's like consumption habits has like a double effect of improving health and improving climate. So the way that, oh no, where's my Nikki? Oh, there, my Nicolette Larder slide. So this has kind of also come about through a partnership with, or a collaboration with Nicolette Larder, who's in human geography at UNE. And Nikki is, her background is in agri-food scholarship, which is really, you know, critical work that looks at, I guess, the problems, to put a fine point on it, with the big capitalist food system. So, you know, what's going on when particular kinds of markets are deregulated at a global scale, when certain kind of free trade agreements happen, when, you know, huge amounts of produce is exported from one region to another, you know, all of the kind of the waste involved in that system, the inequality involved in that system, and then the kind of carbon emissions involved in that system. But really close to Nikki's heart, ultimately, you know, although she's often kind of thinking of the food system in that large scale way, is transforming the local food economy. And this is through thinking about the diverse food economy. So what is the diverse economy? I just want to do a little bit of like background kind of research sharing with you here. So the diverse economies discourse comes from J.K. Gibson Graham, which is two people actually, Kathy Gibson and Julie Graham. And they have this huge kind of global network of scholars and activists, and I guess people like yourselves, right, who are involved in activities that are not part of that big mega system. And when it comes to food, so this is the iceberg. So we often think about the economy in these big sort of big structural ways. So thinking about it in terms of like capitalism and commodity markets and, you know, like wage labor and like the job economy. But actually the economy is much, much bigger than that and includes sort of everything else, from housing cooperatives to housework to gleaning sort of free food off the like edges of a big harvest, the photosynthesis of plants. And so really bringing all of these other aspects into the way that we think about the economy is what the diverse economies discourse does. And so one of the kind of things that we've been doing with this project so far, and it's only really just begun, is to unearth Armidale's diverse food economy. So ask questions about kind of what's going on here, and what could we improve. And that kind of goes to the point I was making earlier about, what was it, the point that I was making earlier? Oh my God, I just totally blanked. I have really totally blanked on the point that I was making earlier, but.
About climate and health?
No, it wasn't. About trying to build on the momentum of what's already here, yeah, right? Yeah. So rather than like, you know, we recognize that there's been a local food group at SLA for years. There's an amazing community garden. There's a food shed. There are things that are outside Coles and Woolies and Aldi that are going on. There's, you know, the SLA stall at the markets. So this is what Nikki calls like an asset approach to kind of doing community work. So rather than thinking about what we don't have, I'm thinking about what we do have and how we can kind of improve that and build on that momentum that exists, so we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. And this framing, I guess, allows us also to think about it in economic terms, which, you know, sometimes we might want to avoid because it seems like we're being sort of capitalist, but this framework around the diverse economy like really can help complicate that.
Complicated or simplify?
I think complicate like the economy.
Okay.
I do think it simplify. That's like our dynamic. I say things that are really complicated in Sujata just as like, do you just mean simplify? This is a little bit more information about diverse economic activity if you're interested. I'm really used to giving PowerPoint presentations when I can see the next slide that's coming.
I just remember it.
Just got to remember it. Right, so what we've done so far in this project is have a day which, well, actually it sort of all began with a meeting with Tanya, Rachel, Lawrence, Nikki and myself, where we were talking about what we could do as part of the Climate and Health Project in relation to food, largely because we'd all expressed interest in this particular issue. And it happened to be on the autumn equinox. And so we came up with the idea to do these events on the equinox and solstice, which kind of gave us a nice deadline, but also, you know, invoked the planets and the sun, you know, kind of seasonal change, which is appropriate for thinking about the food economy. And we invited, I think about 20 people to come and answer a bunch of questions about, you know, the diverse economy, questions which actually, if we have time, and so I'll try to wrap up kind of soon, it would be great to ask all of you as well, to try to draw out what people are doing, why they're doing it, how they're doing it. And this question of how, I think, is really interesting, like really interests myself and Nikki, because, you know, we sort of have all of the knowledge that growing local food is great for the environment, is great for your health, but actually getting people enough resources to shift their time to focus on it, or enough will or interest, is actually one of the is the challenge. And so we're trying to kind of draw out that and then create structures that can sort of help support or facilitate people who really want to do that. And some of the people there have, you know, spent years kind of thinking about this and gradually shifting their life towards kind of local growing. And so, yeah, it was a great opportunity to have those conversations. And then where we're at with this project now is where we've recorded these conversations, and we're going to write up the results, I suppose, and share them with the people who came, and then have another event on the spring equinox to keep building that momentum. And yeah, I suppose there are some ideas that are out there, but it would be great to hear what you think, how we could kind of I'm going to use the word capitalize, but you know what I mean, on what we've got in Armidale in order to kind of keep growing the local food network. Build, how we can build on it. So a challenge to how the food project can centre, one of the challenges, how can the food project centre Indigenous knowledge and health, right? Because a lot of people involved in local food, and this is one of the critiques that comes up in the scholarship, which is kind of why it's useful to have this relationship with Nikki as well, because she's sort of across all of the like global scholarship on local food economies. And that, you know, a lot of people who are involved in local food are middle-class white people with a bit of disposable income or a bit of disposable time. And that not everyone has that privilege. And certainly there's this amazing phrase, which some of you will have heard, you know, that it's a privilege to worry about the end of the world. Some people are just worried about the end of the week. And that, you know, when you have time to really reflect on changing your life practices in order to kind of grow food, you're sort of in the potentially in the group of people who are privileged enough to worry about the end of the world, which is, you know, important thing to worry about, particularly when it comes to climate change. But you know, when we're thinking about kind of the inequalities existing in Australian society, we have to take that into account when we're trying to design projects, local food projects, and not to just replicate those problems. So one of the couple of ways that this is kind of coming up, one is that a lot of farmers we've spoken to have mentioned like allowing access to land for small scale growing enterprises, which is really interesting. And that hasn't really been mapped, or I don't know, what's the word? Formalized, thank you. But then there's also an interesting overlap with what we were saying about before about Indigenous access to country. So I'm wondering and worrying on whether or not those two things could come together somehow. There's also initiatives which there's not a formalized pay the rent initiative in Armidale yet, but a pay the rent initiatives, for those of you who don't know how they work, is they're small, like diverse economic enterprises set up by Indigenous people, and you can pay money or like some sort of tithing to those enterprises, and then a panel will devolve that funding into the community. And the pay the rent, I guess, is the land is stolen, therefore if we pay the rent we can start towards the reparations of that process. And there could be like some sort of scheme where a certain portion of local food income could be given to an initiative like that. But again, it's like, you know, it's still building the momentum on the idea, because that initiative has to be set up, and it's not something that we can set up. But then there's also conversations, and they're still just like keep bubbling up, around revitalising the Aboriginal community garden, which you had some interesting conversations about just today. We've heard that the local lands council is also interested in local food, but we haven't been able to meet with Lisa. And then like ideas of Armajun somehow being involved in this, but we haven't figured it out yet. But anyway, so as you can see, it's like a kind of work in progress. Like on the one hand, it's like, yes, let's, you know, invest money in local food initiatives. Another one is how to keep this question of reparations for colonial violence in the frame as well, and do so in a way that's kind of generative for everyone, which I feel like is the sort of spirit that Uncle Steve brings to the table. So next steps, as I said, write the outcomes up of the meeting, keep consulting with the community, have talks at the Black Gully Festival, and then hopefully by the end of 2021 we'll have a sense of what's next. But right now we'd like to ask you some questions, and you can ask us some.
Yay. And maybe we should ask you questions first, because then you can ask us some. Yeah. Does that sound fair? You're all on mute, so you can answer.
Maybe we could stop. It's hard to. It's nicer to stop. Maybe we should stop sharing, and then I can just.
Yeah.
Ask.
What do you? Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Let's do that.
Okay. So let's
promote people.
Promote people to the main thing. We could do.
Yeah.
Gallery view.
So talk amongst yourselves while I do this.
La, la, la.
Yeah, hum a tune. Do a little dance maybe. On a table so we can see.
I want to say thanks to Jen and Sujata for presenting. I did a hopeless job of introducing you both, so it's good that you picked that up.
Oh. It's all right. We could cut and paste them into the.
Oh yeah, it's a good idea.
So I guess one of the things that we're interested in knowing, and whether or not you share it with us tonight or come back to us with it, is just what is going on. Like, we have been told a number of things from those groups, but yeah, if there's something sort of bubbling away that's kind of a bit hidden, it'd be great to know.
I reckon out of these questions, probably the most interesting one really is the vision for the future, because the other one is, like, especially with a large group, it's kind of hard to really get all those other stories out there. Probably more of a longer process, but yeah, interested to hear your thoughts on that one. That's a pretty big one.
Yeah, does anyone have any kind of pie in the sky dreams for what could be in Armidale, or what has been that could be again?
God's Harvest, Meals on Wheels.
Thanks, Joy.
God's Harvest started in Armidale. It started by an Armidale person, wasn't it? Or am I making that up?
Helen has raised her hand.
I was just going to say, one thing that was talked about earlier on in the food group was the idea of was the mention of lots of people in Armidale having fruit trees and lots of food falling on the ground and being eaten by whatever the bugs, and the idea of people like working and identifying those members of the community who are interested in making that available and working towards the sort of collection and preserving or sharing of that fruit during the year. So that's one. You asked about ideas. That is one idea that has been mentioned before that I think could be built on.
Yeah. Has anyone done like the mapping of the trees, or is that like, are we at the stage of just the idea? And
just the idea, like
yeah. No, that's cool, because it would be a shame if that mapping had been done and it was in someone's like drawer, not to draw on it. But that would be a fun job for someone.
I think there has been a map done.
Oh, really?
Permaculture, I think I've got it somewhere. I mean, I got it, yeah. A permaculture group somewhere has put up a map of some things. Might be olive trees, fruit trees of different kinds, but yeah.
Oh, cool.
I'll find it and send it to you.
That would be awesome.
Armidale. In Armidale, Annette?
I thought so. I could be wrong, but I'll see if I can find it.
Another thing we tried was collaborative mornings where people would go to somebody's garden for 2 hours before they went to work in the morning and share a particular job. And that helped to build community as well as support one another's gardening efforts.
That's a really nice idea. So was that running for a couple of years or something, or?
No, it was just a small group of people that started doing it, and then it sort of fell apart because there wasn't enough thought behind it, I think.
I mean, there was also a permaculture blitz that was somebody volunteered their garden to help get something set up, and a whole group of people went and worked on it to build it, to sort it out. But there's quite a bit of organising. But the casual sort of an hour or two of just adding labour, so 3 or 4 people together.
The perma blitz was that, I forgot his name, Chris Vickeries, because his wife was very sick, but there was only like 4 or 5 people turned up. There wasn't many people. And like those things, everyone said, we'll come, and nobody turns up.
But it's an idea that it needs a lot of background to make it work, but it's a really good idea.
Yeah,
I think there's a lot to be said for small numbers, actually. Like the other things that have been held have been demonstrating how to build a compost heap, or which might be at the community garden or at somebody's place. Those things can be really good too. Like Ray South used to do that, and what's the name of the guy who was up at the community garden? Tim, who was Tim Marshall. So I think those things are really good. Like, they have really built our knowledge over the years going to those things. We've incorporated a lot of those things over time, the worm farms and the compost heaps and the garden beds and stuff like that. It really has worked to build on that knowledge, and it links with the backyard garden tour. Sustainable backyard.
I think we've mentioned in a meeting a while ago about starting a Buy Nothing group within Armidale, which is usually a Facebook-based group for people to advertise things that they're looking for or things that they want to give away. And it doesn't work through trading. You don't need to swap anything for it, and you don't need to pay money for it. But a group like that that's focused on food would be really lovely to see. So, you know, people always have extra eggs or surplus of zucchinis in summer, and you know, for people that are food insecure to be able to go on and get a few things to put together a meal. I think that would be something really nice.
That's really nice. Yeah.
My niece in Canberra joined a group that gave away excess plants and seeds. So if somebody, you know, bought a punnet and it was too much, they'd give the extra. And it was a Canberra-wide organization, but locally there were local units within the city.
I like that idea of extra seedlings in punnets. Yeah, that's something that you always feel like, I just can't, it's too wasteful to throw it away. And then I always end up planting them way too close together to throw them out. Seed banks as well might be really nice to see, some seeds that we know do well in the local area.
Yeah, and there's some good ideas in the chat too. I don't know if everyone's reading the chat. Workshops, mushroom harvesting, guerrilla gardening, connected to Armidale community.
When you're going into the chat, just make sure you select panelists and attendees. Otherwise, it's just going to panelists.
You have to put in panelists and attendees.
You just select that on the drop down.
Oh, okay. There you go.
Yeah.
Sujata and Jen, I just have a question. Like, where do you sit with respect to, because the descriptions you've sort of given, you know, it sounds all very holistic and Steiner schoolish, you know, I don't know. So where do you sit with respect to the use of technology? I mean, you know, Emmy's mentioned Facebook, and, you know, there's apps and that sort of thing, and they're kind of, connecting to the, you know, the young people of today and so on, in terms of how would people get involved when that's kind of the way, you know, through their phone and so on, that's the way they sort of see the world a bit more these days, a lot of people. I mean, do you see that as an issue at all? Do you, and even how do you then link that to the Indigenous side of stuff too? Because, or do you see that as a reasonable question, or?
You mean like with the workshops, so like what we're talking about is more just like sort of face-to-face things? Is that what you're asking, or is that more with the food?
Well, I think more like, you know, if people are growing stuff in their gardens and they want to share it, or how do they, you know, even know about their soil or what they've already got? I mean, there's so much technology out there in terms of, and so little time. And so does that fit in any way? I mean,
yeah. Well, we have a website and Facebook, and like, we're not Amish. I mean, actually, even the Amish use technology for their business enterprise.
Yeah, I didn't mean you per se. I just meant the vision for a local food economy.
Yeah.
So as opposed to the bigger one that we have, I meant the vision for what we could have locally and how that could connect, I guess, using technology as well.
I think that'd sound like it would make a lot of sense to have something that was like, I don't know, even like a Food Network website or something like that, so people could go to one place and then find out about all the different things, or something like, I think that's, probably hasn't been explored. Just, did it come up in the workshop?
Certainly it's come up in the mapping, and I like in relation to the fruit tree idea that Helen came up with, like a similar idea around different, like, available land. Like, there was an idea about doing a map that was available so people could kind of go to a site. And I mean, I think that, like, I do have a response to that is, I suppose, like, a bit, it's not technophobic, but it's like critical of tech solutions. And we have like Lou Conway from the SRI, the Smart Region Incubator at UNE, came to the workshops and was talking about like apps that you can kind of scan apples and get the, you know, nutrition content out of them. And, you know, and Nikki and I were talking about that, and it's like, there's a point where, you know, technology is kind of complicating, and partly like this local food network is about kind of reconnecting with place and people. And so it's not like about getting rid of technology, but it's about not turning everything into a smart technology, but using technology smartly in order to like facilitate the goals of having more food being grown in the ground, having people kind of eat local food and access to local food. So I think sometimes the technological solution can just be the end in itself. Like, oh, we have a cool app for this thing. But it's like, if the app serves your purpose, then go for it. But I'm very against like an app being the answer, unless it's really the right answer for the problem. We all know that there are way too many apps. That maybe is a Steiner School answer. I don't know. I am a Steiner mom.
Well, I'm not. It wasn't meant as a criticism. It was meant as a just exactly that. So many people say, "Oh, well, we're going to solve it by technology. We're going to." So how do you get those people on board, as well as the difference between younger people and people my age, or that just where that's sort of so much the norm, getting people in, I guess. It's I was just throwing it in to throw a spanner in. Yeah.
It's great to think through.
Yeah, definitely.
Just something else that I think is worth paying attention to, having been through the time trying to be involved in growing your own food and using local food. One of the biggest barriers to that is people's habits in what they do with their food, in particular supermarket shopping. And I don't want to hand anyone's dependence or loyalty to different supermarkets within town, because they have made our lives very convenient and they do make distribution of the food and its availability absolutely incredible. But you actually really need to put time into it to re-educate yourself and to change your habits in order to use food in a different way. And it also involves connections with people. Historically, food sharing has been very much about the food actually dominates your life. So, for example, at Christmas time when the apricots are on at our place, most of the time we don't arrange to go away, but if we mention it to other people, or like if we sort of say you're interested, they might say they're interested, but there's not actually a commitment to the work of doing it, to picking them in. Like, it's fairly onerous, and our lives have been made easier in a lot of ways by technology, the easy availability of food. So that's something that really needs to be looked at. Like, I put a lot of time into changing my food habits so that I wasn't dependent on the supermarkets for my purchases.
I mean, it's too like Nikki and I had this exact conversation yesterday about habit, and about how changing habit is a slow process and is a difficult process. And we're actually, working on something which is about that point, and bringing that, because it's something I think and what was really great about the focus groups is that a few years ago, you might have had those focus groups and there might have just been like 100% enthusiasm, but no sense of the kind of reality of what it takes to actually transform the food economy. But there was a kind of like, slightly weathered, like, pessimism about the possibilities, not entirely, but just like, we have to be realistic about this. And habit, which is hard to break. Like, God, I've had to break habits and not break habits. But so I think that's just such a great point. I
was just going to say, just to run this meeting, if people can raise their hand using the raise hand function in the bottom of your Zoom browser, and then we can ask questions. Everybody gets a fair go. Tom Fisher, do you want to ask a question? Or maybe not. Tom, you...
I had my hand up. I tried to unmute. Thanks so much for your presentation. That was incredible. Wastage of food is something that I struggle with. And my own household, there's me, and then on the weekend there's two 18-year-old boys who eat a lot, and then it's back to me again for another 4 or 5 days, and that's difficult. Anyway, the upshot is there's often wastage of food, and so sometimes I'll get to, it's like, oh, I've got half a loaf of bread, or I've got all these carrots or what have you, and maybe they're not fit for human consumption. They could be good for a chicken or a horse or what have you. So some sort of mechanism so that if you, just to reduce that wastage would be good, even if it feeds chickens. That's it.
Yeah, get diverse pets. Someone's suggested.
Yeah. Well, I don't own any animals myself, so, but there, you know, there's that could be a good exchange, that there's people out there who are feeding animals and they'll get whatever free feed they want. But even if it's something, if the food's good for human consumption, if you know there's a Facebook page or whatever it is, you know, to go, hey, here's some free food that would otherwise go in the bin.
Yeah. There's so many, like there's, and it, like that idea, and then the comments from Dorothy and Vanessa in the chat about the food pantry at UNE and Dante's work organising food for students. Yeah, it's all really great. Like we need to, if you don't mind, like I might share this stuff with Nikki as well, and we can kind of put it in the bank. And also just, I'm sure you all saw, but Amy Likens is, I don't know if everyone knows Amy or not. Do people know Amy?
No.
Amy, I'm just going to out you. That's okay.
No. Is better look at her.
Sorry, I'm just trying to stay warm.
Yeah, do you want to share, because Nikki's told me about this project, and it's so great that you're here, and absolutely kind of makes sense that you would bring it up in relation to the comments about habit. So do you want to
just briefly, we're looking at engagement with local food economies in Armidale and probably also Tamworth, both from the producers and the consumers perspective. So Nikki and Lucy are sort of more focusing from the production side, and my side as a psychologist at UNE is looking more at behavior change, why people are interested in why they buy local food, and what gets in the way of buying local food, and knowledge, where to go, convenience, etc. So actually just today, like working with my research assistant, is one of my PhD students going through and creating like a whole survey about like just sort of looking at all the literature that's been published in this and creating a new survey about all the what we would call like barriers and drivers about engagement with local food systems. So we're doing that, and we'll get that to ethics and hopefully out to the community within the next couple of months.